Story number 1. The house at the end of Ashmere Lane had been abandoned for over 70 years, but every window still gleamed like it had been washed yesterday. Locals avoided the street entirely, even in daylight. Kids dared each other to run up to the door and knock, but no one ever made it past the rusted gate. Something about the house watched. When Claire inherited the house from an uncle she never knew, she was stunned. The deed had appeared in the mail with no letter, no lawyer's notice, nothing but her name and the property details. She was 29, recently divorced, and looking for a fresh start. Felt like fate. Her first visit was in the early afternoon, under a bright sun. The grass was too green for how long it had supposedly been empty, and the roses in the front garden bloomed blood-red in tidy rows. But it was the silence that struck her most. Not a single bird, not even wind, just stillness. Inside, the house smelled of lavender and ash. Furniture was covered in white sheets, but the dust was minimal. The air felt warm, too warm, like the walls were breathing. She moved in a week later. The first night was uneventful, mostly. A soft creaking in the walls. A dripping faucet she couldn't locate. Nothing unusual for an old house. By night 3, the temperature dropped to near freezing in her bedroom, even though the rest of the house stayed warm. Her dreams turned vivid, always the same, walking through a hall lined with portraits. Each painting showed someone looking directly at her. Some faces shifted subtly between dreams. Some wept. She chalked it up to stress. One evening, as Claire unpacked books in the attic, she found a trapdoor hidden beneath a threadbare rug. The latch was old but not locked. She opened it and found a narrow staircase descending into pitch-black earth. The air that rose from it smelled like mildew, rot, and perfume. She went down with a flashlight. The stairs led to a bricked corridor barely wide enough to walk. Strange symbols were etched into the walls, some in faded red paint, others in something darker, flaking like dried blood. At the end of the corridor stood a mirror, 8 feet tall, framed in blackened iron. Claire's reflection was distorted, too tall, too thin, her smile slightly delayed. When she touched the glass, it rippled. Something touched back. She staggered upstairs and slammed the trapdoor shut. That night, the portraits from her dreams began appearing in the house. One hung above the fireplace that morning. Another appeared at the top of the staircase. They weren't copies. They were exactly what she'd seen in her nightmares. The paint was wet to the touch. Claire started seeing someone in the mirrors. Not her reflection, someone else. A woman with hollow eyes, a slit mouth, and black hair cascading like ink. Always behind her, always watching. When Claire tried to leave the house the next morning, the front door was gone. Not locked, gone. There was only wall where the door had been. The windows wouldn't break. Her phone had no signal, and any electronics she tried to use simply melted. Screens blackening, batteries oozing. She wasn't alone in the house. At night, footsteps echoed through the halls, louder than any normal person would walk. Heavy, slow. Knuckles rapped from inside the walls. Whispering voices drifted through the vents, all chanting the same word over and over in a language she didn't understand. On the 5th night, Claire finally pried open the trapdoor again. This time, the tunnel beneath had changed. It was longer. The walls seemed to pulse, and the mirror at the end was no longer cracked. It was perfect, smooth, calling. She approached it, shaking. Her reflection was already waiting. Smiled. She didn't. The glass melted like water, and arms shot out. Cold, wet, clawed hands that dragged her inside before she could scream. The next morning, Claire woke up in bed. Sunlight poured through the window. Everything looked normal, except in every mirror, she didn't blink. She didn't follow her movements. She stood still, watching, grinning. Claire tried to leave again. This time the front door was back. It opened easily. The town hadn't changed. She got in her car, drove to a motel, and swore never to go back. But she dreams of the house every night. And sometimes, when she walks by mirrors, her reflection still stands still, grinning that same unnatural smile. A week later, a realtor listed the house again. No record of Claire ever living there. The deed was blank, the name scratched off, but the house is still there on Ashmere Lane, pristine as ever, waiting. And every mirror inside it still holds her, just behind the glass. Story number 2. It was almost midnight when Elijah Marrow turned the key and opened the front door of the old Briarwood house. The door groaned open like something out of a Gothic novel, and a cold draft rolled past him into the night. He stepped inside. He had no choice. Elijah was a caretaker now, though not by trade. He'd been hired through an anonymous online listing to watch over the house for 1 month. The pay was absurdly high. All he had to do was stay inside, lock the doors at night, feed the cat, and never open room 9. He didn't know why there were rules. The house was located in the hills above town, surrounded by old pine trees and dense fog. It was 3 stories tall, built with blackened brick and rotting shutters. The place looked haunted before you ever stepped inside. The kind of haunted that doesn't need ghosts, just silence and shadows and the weight of forgotten tragedies. The cat's name was Jasper, an old black tom with 1 white paw and a torn ear. It always seemed to be watching something just behind Elijah, staring into corners with wide, yellow eyes, hissing when he walked too close to room 9. There were 12 rooms in total. He explored the first night. Dust-covered portraits lined the hallways, showing the house's former owners. Always stiff, always grim. In every painting, someone's eyes were scratched out. By day 5, things changed. It started with the whistling. Soft. Hi. Just 2 notes, always repeating. It came from down the hallway near room 9. The first time he heard it, Elijah froze in place. He hadn't left the TV on. The windows were closed. But the sound persisted. Faint. Constant. Like someone gently breathing through their teeth. Whistle. Pause. Whistle. He tried to ignore it. Plugged in headphones. Played white noise. It didn't help. On the 7th night, he woke at 3:11 a.m. to the sound of someone walking down the hallway. Slow, dragging footsteps. He reached for the bat beside his bed, but when he opened the door, the hallway was empty, except for the open door to room 9. It had been locked since he arrived. Inside was a single chair, and a mirror, and something written on the glass in breath. I see you. Elijah shut the door and nailed it shut. He didn't sleep that night. The next day, the portraits in the hallway had changed. One figure, the man with the long gray beard and stovepipe hat, was missing. Just a blank outline remained in his place. Elijah stared at it, unblinking. He turned and saw muddy footprints leading away. He tried to leave the house that night. The car wouldn't start. His phone only showed static on the screen. Every number dialed gave him the same voice. A long exhale followed by the 2-note whistle. Whistle. Pause. Whistle. Then a whisper. Room 9 remembers. Jasper the cat disappeared the next day. Elijah searched for hours, calling into every room, rattling the bag of food. When he opened the closet beneath the stairs, Jasper tumbled out, headless, his fur soaked in something dark and thick. The word return was carved into the wood above the corpse. That night, room 9 was open again. Elijah sat outside the door for an hour, holding a lighter and a kitchen knife. When he finally stepped in, the chair and mirror were gone. Instead, there was a staircase spiraling downward, where no basement had ever existed. He descended. Took him 7 minutes. At the bottom was a long corridor, wet stone walls, flickering gas lamps that lit without fire, and the whistling louder now, all around him. Whistle. Pause. Whistle. He followed the sound to a steel door covered in handprints, some large, some impossibly small. The door creaked open at his touch. Inside was room 9, the same chair, the same mirror, but now he was in the reflection, seated, watching himself walk in. And behind the seated Elijah, something moved. A figure, long-limbed, gaunt, wearing the stovepipe hat from the missing portrait. Its eyes were holes, deep, sucking voids, and it began to whistle. Whistle. Pause. Whistle. The seated Elijah grinned. The real Elijah screamed. When he awoke, he was in the chair. The mirror showed an empty room. Room 9 had claimed him. The next caretaker arrived 2 weeks later. He was handed a list of rules. He was told, feed the cat, lock the doors, never open room 9. The new cat, a gray tabby, hissed every time it passed the hallway. And every night, just before bed, the new caretaker heard it. Whistle, pause, whistle, coming from room 9, coming from the mirror, coming for him. Story number 3. The first thing Lena noticed about the old Bellingham estate was that the clocks never stopped ticking. She had inherited the house unexpectedly. An obscure great-uncle she had never met, some estranged arm of her father's family tree. The place was tucked deep in the Vermont woods, where roads were still dirt and the air smelled of moss and age. She came alone, thinking she'd stay for a week, clear it out, maybe sell it. The house was enormous, built in 1891, and strangely pristine despite its age. Every wall was lined with clocks, grandfather clocks, cuckoo clocks, wall-mounted regulators, desk clocks, wind-up ones, chiming ones. Dozens, maybe hundreds, all ticking. None of them showed the same time. The house had no electricity, but somehow the clocks worked. At night, the ticking grew louder. By the second day, she was already uneasy. In every mirror, she swore she saw movement just beyond her own reflection. Not shapes or figures, just a shimmer, like breath fogging the glass. There was one clock that disturbed her most. A massive grandfather clock in the entryway, carved in obsidian black wood, its face ringed in tarnished gold. Unlike the others, this one didn't tick. It was silent, stopped at 3:15. When she tried to open its glass door to inspect the hands, it wouldn't budge. The keyhole beneath it was sealed over with melted wax. She asked a neighbor about the place, the only neighbor within 10 miles. A wrinkled woman named Myra, who'd lived there her whole life. That house was built by Emmett Bellingham, Myra said, her voice gravel. Clockmaker, genius, mad, some say. They say he made a clock that could count down to a person's death. Said he wound it with his soul. Lena laughed. Myra didn't. They found Emmett in the basement. All the clocks in the house were stopped. Every single one. Except the one in the entryway. That one was ticking backward. Lena went home that night and stared at the entryway clock. It hadn't moved. Still at 3:15. She didn't sleep. On the third night, the clocks began chiming. Not in unison. Not at midnight. Each clock chimed randomly, endlessly, as if arguing with one another. Some rang with deep, booming tolls. Others with high-pitched, manic notes. At 3:15 a.m., every clock stopped. Complete silence swallowed the house. And then she heard footsteps upstairs. She should have left, but something compelled her to stay. A pressure in her skull. A voice, maybe, just beneath thought, whispering in rhythm with the ticking. Downstairs, the obsidian clock now read 3:14. It had moved. Backward. She ran to the front door. Locked. The windows wouldn't open. Her phone was dead. She tried breaking a window with a chair. The glass rippled but didn't crack, like striking water. Lena hid in a guest room, heart pounding, every second stretching. At 3:13, she heard breathing in the hallway. Heavy, labored, like a dying man. The doorknob turned slowly. She pressed herself into the closet, pushing clothes aside. Inside, there was a small door she hadn't seen before. A dumbwaiter, maybe? She climbed in, shaking, and pulled the door shut. The breathing entered the room. The sound of footsteps, not walking but dragging. A whisper, time bends. Time takes. She stayed in the dark compartment for what felt like hours. When she finally crawled out, the room was empty. But the mirror had changed. In it, her reflection was smiling. Her real face was not. The mirror self-mouthed words she couldn't hear, then raised a hand, and the glass cracked from the inside. She ran back downstairs. The clocks had started again, ticking faster now like a swarm of insects crawling through time. The black clock now read 3:12. She ran to the basement door. It was wide open. She descended the stairs, clutching a lantern. The basement was enormous, lined with shelves and workbenches. Every wall was covered in gears, rusted and whirring slowly. Dozens of incomplete clock mechanisms ticked at once. In the center was a coffin-shaped box made of glass and copper. Inside lay Emmett Bellingham, eyes open, smiling, and around his neck a small silver stopwatch. Ticked, and as Lena watched, the seconds reversed. 3:11, 3:10. The walls trembled. Dust rained from the ceiling. The gears spun faster. Whispers filled the basement, chanting in a language she didn't know. The stopwatch's ticking was inside her skull. She stumbled backward and knocked over a chair. The sound echoed like a gunshot. Emmett's eyes turned to her. Not slowly. Instantly. They locked with hers. And he sat up. "No one leaves," he said. His voice was wind over dry leaves. "Once you've heard the clocks." She screamed and fled back upstairs. The front door was gone. Just a wall of ticking clocks. 3:09. The house had no more windows, no more exits. Just walls and clocks, and mirrors, and ticking, always ticking. She tried to destroy them, smash two with a fire poker. They exploded in clouds of soot and broken brass. The next morning they were back, whole again. On the final day, Lena sat in the entryway, staring at the black clock, his hands moving slowly, rhythmically. 3:01. She didn't move, couldn't. A mirror nearby showed her face. She was smiling again, but her real mouth was closed. The reflection raised its hand and waved, and Lena felt herself rising, pulled to the mirror's surface as if by invisible strings. Her skin chilled, her bones ached. The last thing she saw before being swallowed by the glass was the obsidian clock ticking once more. 3 o'clock, and then silence. Now the house waits for another. The clocks still tick. The mirror still smiles. And the black clock ticks down minute by minute, waiting to claim its next keeper of time. Story number 4. The rain hadn't stopped for days. Not since Anna and her younger brother, Caleb, arrived at the old estate in the Blue Ridge Mountains, a towering Victorian house their estranged grandmother had left them in her will. No one in the family had heard from her in decades. Some whispered she'd gone mad. Others claimed she'd died years ago and simply hadn't realized it yet. Anna didn't believe in ghosts. Not really. She believed in broken families, old people who got lonely, and empty houses that creaked because they were tired. But even she couldn't explain why the house cried. It started the first night. As she unpacked in the second-floor bedroom, a soft sobbing drifted through the walls. She assumed it was Caleb. Maybe he was upset about the move. But when she found him downstairs in the parlor, playing a game on his tablet with his headphones in, the sound followed her. Muffled and wet, like a woman trying to cry without being heard. That night, water began to seep from the walls. Not from pipes or rain damage, just weeping. Long streaks of dampness trailing down the floral wallpaper like tear tracks. When she pressed her hand to it, the wall pulsed beneath her palm, warm and damp, like skin. Caleb said he didn't hear anything. But the next morning, he had deep shadows under his eyes and refused to talk about the night. He'd locked his door, something he never did. Anna decided to call someone. Plumber, maybe. An inspector. Anyone. But her phone had no signal. Landline? Dead. No Wi-Fi. She drove down the mountain, but the single winding road was blocked by a landslide that hadn't been there the day before. The locals in the nearby town were tight-lipped. One woman at the diner, in her 60s, stopped stirring her coffee when Anna mentioned the address. "You shouldn't be there," the woman said, not unkindly. "The house doesn't like to be alone. It remembers." Anna left before finishing her coffee. That night, the sobbing grew louder. She followed it through the halls until it led her to a locked door at the end of the third-floor corridor. She hadn't noticed that floor on the first day. The door had a keyhole shaped like an eye. The wallpaper around it was soaked through. Mold-black streaks oozed downward like rot. Caleb began talking in his sleep. He whispered names, none she recognized, and giggled like a child. Once, she heard him say, "She's crawling on the ceiling, Anna. Don't wake her." She burst into his room, shaking him. He didn't remember anything. The third day brought footsteps. Not hers, not Caleb's, shuffling along the floorboards at night. Above them, below them, in the walls. Sometimes, they were accompanied by a dragging sound, like someone pulling a wet blanket or a limp body. Anna began boarding up mirrors. Everyone showed something off. Delays in her reflection. A twitch where there shouldn't be. A mouth smiling when hers wasn't. One mirror reflected her standing behind herself, staring, watching, head tilted, as if waiting for something. She smashed that mirror. That night, a new mirror appeared on the landing, an antique one with vines carved into the wood. She had never seen it before. In it, her reflection had no eyes. She took Caleb and tried to leave, but the front door was missing, gone. Just wallpaper and tears. They ran room to room. Every window showed only blackness. No trees, no rain, just void. The clocks in the house all stopped ticking. Every one of them struck 3:33 a.m. And from somewhere above, a door creaked open. The third-floor hallway. The locked door now stood ajar. Anna told Caleb to stay. He didn't argue. She climbed the stairs. The hallway stretched longer than it should have. Walls weeping like open wounds. The sobbing was clearer now. Closer. The door at the end stood wide open, breathing fog into the hall. Inside was a nursery, dusty, faded, cobwebs like netting. A single cradle sat in the center of the room, slowly rocking. Empty. But the sobbing came from there. Anna stepped closer. The crying stopped. And from the corner of the room, something stood up. It looked like her grandmother, but younger. Her eyes were sewn shut. Her skin was pale, stretched. Her mouth hung open but made no sound. Then her head twisted completely around, slowly, like a wind-up doll unwinding. Anna turned and fled. The door slammed behind her, and the house howled. Not wind, the house itself. Walls throbbed. The wallpaper bled. Floorboards buckled. Caleb screamed from below. She raced down to find him standing in the foyer, staring at a painting that hadn't been there before. It was a portrait of a woman holding a baby. The woman had Anna's face. The baby looked just like Caleb. In the background, a man stood. His eyes were black sockets, his hands long and wrong. Anna turned to grab Caleb, only he was already walking away, trance-like, toward the basement door, which now stood open. She grabbed him, yanked him back. He snarled. Not cried, not shouted. Snarled. Eyes blank, face twisted, voice not his. She wants to trade, he hissed. You for her, blood for blood. Anna dragged him into the kitchen and locked the door. But every light in the house flickered. The plumbing groaned. Water gushed from the sink, the fridge, the ceiling. Dark water, thick and warm. The house was crying again. She held Caleb through the night. In the morning, the door was gone, replaced by a blank wall. The house had no doors now, no escape. They were trapped. The sobbing has never stopped. Every day, Anna hears whispers in the walls. Sometimes they're her grandmother's voice, sometimes her own. Sometimes Caleb stares too long at the corners of the room and laughs. And at night, the house tells her stories in water, bleeding down the walls in shapes and faces. It weeps and weeps and waits, because the house remembers, and it is always hungry.